welcome everybody. Welcome back to the Scottish Independence Podcast, and you will recognise our two quite regular guests. We've got Isobel, Lindsay and Bill Ramsay. Lovely to have you back in our studio again, folks.
Thank you.
What brings us together today is a sense of collective rage, shall we say, or indignation about something that was said in Westminster. So let's just play the clip.
Pete Wishaw.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. On Monday at the dispatch box, the Defence Secretary said the Scottish Government were a threat to national security. A charge repeated this morning by the Scottish Secretary. What he in effect was saying is that a democratically elected government, elected by 1.3 million Scots, possess a threat to this country. I don't know if it's something the Deputy Prime Minister will repeat at the dispatch box today, but can he tell me why democratic Scotland is a threat to national security and China is not?
Deputy Prime Minister.
I took a DNA test a few years ago. I'm 5% Scot. The people of Scotland are not a threat. They're not a threat to national security. It's the SNP. And they decide to get rid of nuclear deterrent. It's a threat to national security. He should hide his head in shame.
The Ingham.
So there we go. I mean, my first reaction, which I ran onto Blue Sky to share, was it's as if he thinks the SNP is some interloper that's not made up of Scottish people. You know, they are Scottish. We Scots elected them. How we can say, oh, the Scots are not a problem, but the SNP, it defies any kind of logic.
Yes, and I mean, the fact that was said by three different people, you know, in the government, in the Labour ministers, that's telling us it's more than just, you know, okay, people do flyaway remarks, and they get caught up in the moment and they come out with stuff, but not when it's repeated and repeated and repeated.
They have been quite explicit that this is about nuclear weapons. And the irony is that Douglas Alexander, who repeated this, would have had to accuse his own father of being a threat to national security, because the Reverend Douglas Alexander Sr., whom I knew in the early 60s, was a member of the Iona community, who's totally opposed to nuclear weapons and much of the military complex. And he was warden of Community House, which was their centre in Glasgow, and they kindly gave us the Committee of 100 Scottish grouping, which was the civil disobedience end of the anti-nuclear movement, a free office in Community House. And Douglas Alexander Sr. was very helpful. Now, he just died last year, but on the basis that this is about opposition to nuclear weapons, then his own father would have been in that same category.
It really is quite absurd. I mean, they're bandying round the concept of this is a national security threat, that is a national security threat. We have the nuclear missiles, the nuclear carrying submarines based in Scotland. So if there's a threat, a nuclear threat, then it's Scotland that faces one. And the reason we have it is because of the current UK's policy. So, yes. I mean, it would be reasonable, I think, for Scots to say that remaining in the United Kingdom is a national security threat for Scotland. I mean, you could say it's almost as simple as that. And one of the reasons why many people want independence, it's not the only reason by any manner of means, but is because we host the British nuclear weapons. I'm not calling them a deterrent because they don't deter, but we host Britain's nuclear weapons, though with the arrival of some American F-35s down south, and they are American, they're all American, but then again, so effectively are the Vanguard submarines. But they're throwing the term around all over the place. And I think it's a feature as Britain becomes more unstable socially, which it is. They're starting to stir up fear. Yeah. And in a sense, where America was or is, Britain seems to be falling. I mean, one of the key features of American society is if you have social issues to address, you treat them as a law and order issue first. And to some extent, I think we're seeing that with Britain now, and the rise of the far right and the increased inequality. People, I mean, Britain is definitely, to me, it feels as if it's more socially coherent than it has been in the past, and which is possibly, it's another reason why I think we should be independent.
Mm-hmm. I mean, the one thing you didn't say is which nation's security are we talking about? There's 4 nations in the UK.
Yes.
Yeah, that's a point. I mean, sometimes when these things get said, especially down in Westminster, you can sit there and feel insulted. I mean, it's kind of par for the course, isn't it? At the moment, you keep feeling insulted by what they come up with. But I mean, do you think they're actually really being said to their English constituency, their English population, rather than really aimed at us?
No, I think they have been told that there are elections in Scotland next May and they need to focus some of their arguments, some of their attacks in that direction. So I think it's very much focused on that. Can we find anything to undermine support for Scottish independence that might express itself in Labour losing even more seats? But of course, we're in the situation, we've got such a strong case for arguing this in Scotland, because it's only a few weeks ago that a senior researcher in the Royal United Services Institute said that the 2 biggest targets in the UK, the 2 key targets, was Paisley and Coulport, which we expected, and Lossiemouth, now that it's got the Americans there, the American reconnaissance teams there. So he actually said that the Russians aren't, what's the point in them bombing London? There's nothing threatening there.
Well, and they own half of it as well, don't they? The Russians own
So we're in the situation that Scotland is not only clearly, admitted clearly, the 2 biggest targets in the UK, but those are among the 2 top targets in Europe. So we have been put in that enormously dangerous situation. And that is because the decisions are being made for the supposed grandiose aspirations of the British state.
Yeah. So it's our national security is perhaps more at threat from Starmer and the UK government, followed by the Americans. Perhaps the Russians are only in 3rd place as a threat to us.
Yes, absolutely.
How long has the American, the A-35s, been in Lossiemouth? Is that just something I didn't pick up on?
They're going to use Lossiemouth for a reconnaissance, for reconnaissance flights over the North Atlantic. The F-35s, I think, will be based elsewhere. It's not that, but I mean, an important point is the extent to which the UK itself faces what would be described a national security threat. Now, when people think of national security, the basic determinants are territory and also whatever political system operates at the time. In other words, if whatever it is a threat to government and society, that's one, and the other one is territory. Now, it's true that when Scotland leaves the United Kingdom, the territory will be, will leave. But the notion that Scotland, as part of the British Isles, would become some sort of hostile state is absurd. I mean, it's simply absurd. As if an independent Scotland would take Faslane, which would be a Scottish port, Scottish base, and rent it out to some other state. I mean, I'm sure the next time we're in an independence, a serious fight over independence, someone will publish something saying that, the Scots are going to hand over Faslane to the People's Republic of China or something crazy like that. I mean, we'll get that sort of thing. And of course, if the Scottish government was going to do that, then the UK would have a reasonable, case, but it's not going to happen. when you actually look at it and you think, what are the threats that face the UK and Scotland and elsewhere? The threats are not a threat of invasion. I remember during the independence campaign in 2014, somebody, a reputable polling company, did a poll and asking people about invasion, and they gave a list of who is likely to invade Scotland, or even it was UK, and they had the Russians about 18th place, and just above them was an invasion from space. One was 3%, and the other one was 4%, and I can't remember what one it was. It's possible that invasion from Russia was seen as slightly more likely than invasion from space, and I'm not getting into the wherewithals of the illegal Russian invasion of Ukraine, but they can't capture Kharkiv, which is the distance between Glasgow and Cumbernauld, or something like that. I remember I sat down and looked at the map. It's not very far. So the idea that the Russians are invading is, it's risible. There was a movie made in the 1960s, or maybe the 70s, and it was called The Russians Are Coming. And what it was about was a Russian submarine somewhere off. It was a comedy. It was a Russian submarine somewhere off the coast of California. And these were the days when the relationship, at least they were starting to look at treaties and so on. So things had improved somewhat. But it had this hapless Russian submarine that found itself grounded somewhere in the Californian coast. And these Russian submariners arrive in some hippie community in California. And the film was called The Russians Are Coming. It was a comedy. Cut that to about 20 years ago. There was another movie called Red Dawn. And again, it was seen as farcical. I had a friend who was in the States at the time it was out. And we saw it in the same way as the film The Russians Were Coming. The idea that an invasion from some small Central American state somewhere in California, the United States was under threat, and it was these American freedom fighters underground fighting this successful invasion from somewhere in South America. Now, in Britain, it was seen as a comedy. My friend who was in the States at the time, he was going, and he went one night. He was going from one place to another to the local cinema, and he said at the end of it, the Americans are cheering and clapping. They were actually taking it seriously instead of taking it as a joke it was meant to be. So the problem we're getting into now is we're seeing politicians bandy around the phrase national security. The world is a dangerous place. That's true, but some bits are more dangerous than others. And I've said many times, if you share a border with the Russian Federation or with Israel, you've got problems. If you're in our part of the world, you've got far, far less problems. So I'm not saying that the world isn't a dangerous place, but some bits are more dangerous than others. And we live in a fairly stable part of the world. At what point would the purser on the ferry from Larne to Cairnryan have to announce over the Tannow, danger, danger, you're leaving a geopolitical sleepy Apollo and entering a dangerous, uncertain world? Where is the line there? Basil's point is right. We are, because we have the nuclear weapons based here, then if there was a nuclear war and it would happen by mistake, I don't think it would happen deliberately, then we would end up in that situation. But both sides, it often suits both sides to play the game. Another example, and I'll finish with this, is every so often, and you'll have seen it, there's a photograph that appears in the media, and it's a big lumbering Russian bomber, and flying beside it is a British jet fighter. And we see that every 6 months or so. It suits both the air forces because it's a case for why you should, be vigilant and all the rest of it. But for that Russian bomber to come to somewhere not within UK territorial waters, but or even airspace, it has to leave Russia, be picked up by the Finns in their radar. Then the Swedes pick it up in their radar, although the Finns will have told them. Whatever assets the United States Air Force has in the area, and they're the world's military hegemon in that sense. They'll have picked it up, and this is hours before it gets anywhere near us. Then the Norwegians pick it up. The BBC sometimes do a wee story, the pilots rushing out to their planes and taking off and all the rest of it. The pilots who do the photo shots are still in their bed when the Russian plane leaves. But of course, there's always three planes. There's a Russian plane, there's a plane beside it, and crucially, there's the other fighter taking photographs. Russian planes. So we do live in a more stable part of the world, but in a relative sense, if they're going to, if there was incoming, then it would be incoming to Far's Lane as to somewhere down south.
Yeah, I always thought those Russian photos were prompted by how well we were doing in the independence polls. Do
you think this is then just, it's a wee ploy that someone's come up with to try and put off Scots for voting?
Yes, and I do think that nobody told poor Anna Sarwar that this was going to be used, because in watching him being interviewed and asked did he agree, he was clearly extremely uncomfortable for obvious reasons. Oh, he did say he agreed, but I mean, he couldn't say anything else. Since Douglas Alexander had already agreed, and Healy, their defence minister, had announced this, and Lammy, and so he couldn't say anything else, but he was clearly very uncomfortable. But I think it is useful, and we should perhaps take up this word of security, because to be fair, the UK, which every 5 years or so has these defence and security reviews, I mean, it never gets into the media, the general media. It's not in the usual political debate, but those preparing this do look at what is security for a nation. And this is what we should most certainly be doing in Scotland. And I know one that I looked at a few years ago now, and they listed the security threats to the UK. And pandemics came in, obviously natural disasters with climate change also, possibly going to prompt many of them came in. Organised crime, major organised crime came in with a price tag. They said, I found this, I wonder how they'd put this together, with a price tag of 37 billion a year. Because of serious organised crime. They had cyber attacks as well coming in, and that has increased enormously. Yeah. You just have to look at the cable map of the world, and you can look at Scotland and the UK, and you can see this quite modest number of cables. Poor Tyree is suffering just now because it's little cable from Mull, I think, was damaged 3 weeks or so in a storm, and it's never been fully restored yet. They haven't managed to fully repair it yet, and they are still suffering from this. You look at how comparatively simple, and if we get into undersea drones, could cut off cables and completely end all our communication systems in effect. And we know from the cyber attacks, the limited criminal cyber attacks that have taken place in companies, the kind of impact these comparatively small things can make.
Yeah, the resilience factor is important. And I think the point about the impact on infrastructure, because of the way that infrastructure is organised and how it's maintained through cyber and through electronic medium and so on. You'll have noticed recently, particularly Chancellor Merz, when he became Chancellor, started to talk about a German rearmament. Now, to some extent, that was to do with attitudes to Ukraine. The French picked it up, the British picked it up. Now, leaving aside, again, the invasion of Ukraine was illegal. The Russians should not have done it. It's a breach of international law, and Ukrainians are defending themselves. That I understand. But we're seeing military companies using that and similar things to heighten fear. But if you think about the resilience issues that Isobel was just talking about, their products that they're selling and trying to sell more of don't address those resilience issues. And if the resilience issues were to be addressed, then the products that they have, many of them, they do not address those issues. So the question is, how much does modern weaponry address real issues of national security?
Yeah.
I can't remember someone who said it was possibly an industrialist during the American Civil War, because that's when it really started. And you never let a good war go to waste in terms of manufacturing, profits and sales. But if you start to address those issues, then the money for the more traditional weaponry, or even weaponry itself, is actually necessary. A really good example of what happens when modern resilience goes down, and maybe Isobel maybe want to talk about that.
This is just 3 or 4 weeks ago. The citizens of Biggar woke up and we discovered we couldn't communicate, any of us, with the outside world, because as it turned out, we eventually found that someone had made a mistake and had put 2 cables a wee bit close together, and that had overheated and that had melted miles of underground cable. So we wakened up, we had no Wi-Fi, and as a result we had no, because BT has been allowed to go over to the Wi-Fi phone system, we didn't have the landline alternatives either, and the mobile phone networks were all down. Then people discovered it wasn't just that, it was the fact you couldn't get petrol because the petrol pumps didn't work. None of the money machines in the shops worked. The women in the bank had to stand outside and say to people, look, nothing works, we can't give you cash. And
I never heard anything about this at all.
Well, exactly. Well, one of the reasons why you possibly didn't hear about it was that nobody could communicate.
Couldn't tell anyone.
Nobody outside Biggar knew.
But this went on for a day and a half. Later than that, I didn't get my mobile phone signal back until late afternoon the following day. Wow. And it was so, people were begging the shops, would you, haven't got cash, would you take an IOU? So the local co-op for regular customers had lots of IOUs. The local museum thought, oh, well, we've got quite a bit of cash in the safe. But then they discovered they couldn't open the safe. It was just an example. Yeah. And this little bit because of a little mistake.
And it affected the schools and affected...
Obviously the schools didn't. The hospital didn't. I think the fire station has a special kind of emergency communication thing. But speaking to one of the teachers, she said, if a child had become ill, we would have had in Biggar the opportunity to go and carry that child across to the health centre. But for one of the rural schools, they didn't have that kind of potential, and the local hospital itself couldn't get anyone's records. They couldn't phone out.
You could imagine that causing panic locally, because you would have had
the dependence. Now, this is just a little mistake in a little place.
Yeah.
But can you imagine just what would happen if you had had that kind of mistake in Glasgow? or Edinburgh, and how vulnerable we all are, and the negligence of the British state, to a lesser extent possibly the Scottish government, but particularly the British state, in protecting us from these kind of risks and trying to work out ways in which, if there are errors, there are fallback kinds of communication systems and so on. But I'd also like to come back what Beil was saying about the arms companies, because it was the Financial Times on Saturday had a shocking story, and again, a story which I don't think has been picked up anywhere else. And it's a story of, I think we might call it cosy corruption, but my goodness, what corruption. And they had been given a photograph of a jolly group of about 60 in a luxury ski resort in Switzerland in February this year. This group of 60, it was the absolute top brass in the armed forces and the MOD, and the absolute top brass in all the big arms companies and their big lobby groups, all having this nice free time together, a whole week. And it was supposed to be financed by a charity to encourage winter sports for the armed forces, a charity financed by the private companies. And I did think when I read, I wonder if they ever offered any of the poor bloody mariners who have that awful job at Vaseline the chance for a luxury week. The fact that this could take place when it's so obviously corrupt, you have a duty as the MOD and the armed forces to get the best deals and the cheapest deals for the taxpayer from these big arms companies. And yet here you are jollowing up, having your photos taken. And of course we know the revolving door with the armed forces, top armed forces people and the big arms companies, and vice versa, the ones who are seconded into the MOD. And you have to link this to the story that the National ran, again, rather neglected as far as I could see by everyone else, about the report that had come out that the MOD's accountants could not sign off their accounts because they could not explain £1.5 billion in supposed assets that couldn't be identified. Another problem of explaining exactly how about £6 billion had been spent. Now, this is an absolute scandal. We know that MOD contracts that they give to the big arms companies, you can reckon they're always going to end up years and years late, and billions and billions over the original estimate. And the whole system is corrupt. And the arms companies, as Beil was referencing there, they have been determined, get in fast with the orders for a lot of this conventional weaponry, because when you're in a situation, as one former Tory junior minister said, why are we spending all this money when £100 drone can knock out a £5 million tank?
This might be a good point to play the clip from the SCND conference where Richard Leonard gave an incredibly passionate, very, very good speech, because he addresses a little bit about Starmer's sort of economic approach, which I think ties in with what you were saying there.
We know that this rearmament will drive us towards war, that militarising the economy will build up endless pressure for wars. In his first 30 days of taking office, Keir Starmer signed off an amended UK-US Mutual Defence Agreement, which included the removal of the 10-year review clause. In so doing, he removed without public or parliamentary scrutiny what little public and parliamentary scrutiny there was. And as one headline writer wrote, Starmer permanently ties UK nuclear arsenal to Washington. On the 23rd of June this year, on the occasion of the Prime Minister announcing from the NATO summit in The Hague that we will be spending 5% of our GDP on defence, a Downing Street press release was issued where we were told this was about, I quote, creating jobs and opportunities for British people. They claimed that it represented plans for economic growth in a way not seen since 1945. You couldn't make it up. In 1945, we built the welfare state. We founded the National Health Service. And by the way, we also nationalised the coal industry, nationalised the gas industry, nationalised the electricity industry, nationalised the railways, nationalised the docks, and we even nationalised the Bank of England.
Yeah,
that's the kind of speech I wish we were getting from the First Minister.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
About 8 days, was it 8 days ago? Yeah, 6 days ago, the British Army introduced a new reconnaissance, which is it's a reconnaissance vehicle. It looks like a small tank. It's a reconnaissance vehicle, Ajax. 8 years late. 8 years late. And the Sky News headline was, "Is it any good?" So now, Sky News is maybe a little more critical than the BBC. The way that the military industrial, the arms industry, and that the lobbying. The lobby outfits are, they're almost as effective as the Scottish Whisky Association, frankly. They are really, really effective. And the question is, if you wanted this stuff, is it of any good? And the amount of money involved is massive, and therefore they need narratives. They need narratives of the world is a dangerous and uncertain place. And as I say, some bits are, some bits less so, and we live in one of the less so bits. And the claim that Scotland is a national security threat to the United Kingdom, and as one of you said earlier on, to whom does it threaten? That is part of that whole build-up of we want to spend more money on weaponry. And this is not a pacifist position. I mean, the Royal United Services Institute published an article, and two economists tackled head-on the idea that increasing arms expenditure is virtuous for the whole economy. That is to say, we spend this money on manufacturing weapons, and therefore it has a multiplier effect in the economy. It's really questionable if it's any sort of multiplier effect at all. If you're looking to grow the economy, the point that Richard Leonard made actually there, you do what Keynes did. I mean, what Keynes was working was a war economy in Britain. But then as an outcome, you had all those benefits right up until the 1970s. And indeed this morning, Richard Murphy did one of his short videos was actually covering the point about Keynesianism. When you compare Keynesianism and how it works and how it was misunderstood, we're now in a state of constant recession. And money has been used in the arms industry simply doesn't grow the economy. There's a very little effect on that.
So going back to what Richard Leonard was saying about that Starmer had done away with this 10-year review. I mean, is that just part and parcel of the kind of increased momentum towards moving towards a more of a military complex kind of idea? I mean, is there a real disadvantage to not having that review? I didn't even know there was one. So
yeah, well, I mean, of course there is a disadvantage to it. There is a concept of the blank check, and it's a version of the blank check. But one of the problems is our British Prime Minister at the moment, in his own way, he is quite strange and quite unusual. No one seems to know what Keir Starmer is about, whether he's got his own set of values. I mean, for instance, take Blair. I didn't agree with Blairism, but Blair did have a set of his own bizarre values, and now he's a multi-millionaire because of it. But he was prepared to put a case. I didn't agree with the case, but Starmer doesn't seem to have a case. Other people seem to feed him lines and positions that he takes, and then he ditches them. You know, some people actually wonder, has he any moral compass at all? Many politicians of many positions have that. You can disagree with that or you can agree with it. But he seems to be almost rudderless without other people telling him what to do.
Except on one issue, and that is Israel and Gaza. And again, this is something media won't touch. He has very, very strong personal commitments to Israel. And you just have to look, this is for family reasons, you just have to look at an interview he gave, this was before the October events, to the Israeli Times, in which he was visiting there, and he was saying what a wonderful place Israel is, and he admires it so much, and he's so committed to it, etc., etc. There's no doubt at all that he did and does have a very, very strong bias there. As far as the other things go, no, I mean, you have to remember that Starmer was one of kind of, shall we say, centre-right in the Labour Party, who, when Corbyn was the leader, took a position, a shadow position in the Corbyn shadow government group.
Yeah.
So, and when he stood as Labour Party leader, all kinds of things were there in his manifesto that suggested he was someone
There's
the left and the right.
a recent book has been published. I saw a review of it, and the author was being interviewed on, I think it was Nevada Media, and he was saying that Morgan McSweeney, who's his chief of staff, the author on the programme said the following. He said that McSweeney was speaking to a journalist who had in previous times been involved in the Tory party, pointed to the 10 pledges and said to the journalists, none of these pledges are going to happen. And that's remarkable because he knew the journalist was not going to report it, and wasn't going to report it in the mainstream media. So Keir Starmer says literally one thing one day and something else the next day. So even when it comes to issues of national security, what is his position in that regard? I mean, apart from the fact that he seems to be very pro-Israel, and as someone else said, the media often treat the IDF as if they've got a protected characteristic. You can't criticise them. But Starmer himself, I find it difficult to even get my head around what his own values are. And if you get someone like that in charge of a country's national security, maybe Keir Starmer is a threat to the UK.
So we're talking about national security. You've got the Prime Minister who's as you've just described him, then who he puts round about him, whether it's cabinet ministers or whether it's people in the cabinet office or the Sweeney, that's those people then could have huge kind of influence on where those policies go. And when I think about who the people that are in the cabinet, I'm not seeing anyone that I think anywhere else has got particularly, that comes across as being particularly got a strong position or something, whether I might agree with it or not. It's a bit ironic, isn't it, given that we started off this to talk about what's actually a source of national insecurity, and getting to the point where maybe it's this government that we voted in.
Marlon, don't complain too much, because remember, the Labour government, Westminster, is making such a disastrous job that is what's saving the SNP just now.
Yeah, that's true, actually. Yeah.
That is what will probably ensure the SNP becomes the government again next May. So don't be too critical. But I think your you're right, he's like a kind of, in so many things, a hollow man. It depends what's put in. And the one thing that he does seem to be so proud of, his ability to sook up to Trump. And he doesn't realise that, first of all, Trump's approval rating in the States has gone down to 39%.
Yeah.
And just think what his approval rating in the UK and throughout Europe is.
Yeah.
And it's only going to go down further and further and further. Basically, the only thing Starmer knows to do in this kind of thing is just to sign up to what will please the Trump White House.
Another clip from that SCND conference, and again, that wonderful speech from Richard Leonard, where he lays out exactly what the relationship is.
I've been challenged a few times by the UK Defence Journal. I don't know whether they are represented here today or not. But I've been challenged for repeatedly stating in the Scottish Parliament that the idea of an independent UK nuclear deterrent is mendacious propaganda, i.e. it's a lie. The Pentagon supplies us with our nuclear warheads, with the arming, fusing and firing system, that we are dependent on US guidance systems, that any use of these weapons would need to be sanctioned by the White House and then only at the request of the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO, who incidentally is always an American general. And now again, without public discussion or parliamentary approval, we are seeing the return of American bases, including at the refurbished Lossiemouth, where US planes will be stationed for the first time since the end of the Cold War. We are seeing US-owned B-6112 and B-6113 missiles stored at a refurbished RAF Lakenheath, although the government refuses to confirm or deny their location. We see the purchase of F-35 bombers by the UK government to be armed with these missiles, which will be leased, yes, leased from the United States, which Maria Eagle, the Defence Minister, told the House of Commons on the 25th of June of this year, represents, she said in quotation marks, represents the biggest strengthening of the UK's nuclear posture in a generation, which is a clear breach of Article 1 and Article 6 of the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And in that statement, the Minister also confirmed that whether or not the missiles are launched will be an American decision, as they retain, I quote, absolute control and custody over them. We were also told that we would be joining the NATO nuclear mission, where again, she was forced to admit that, I quote, any deployment under that mission requires the agreement of the NATO nuclear planning group of 31 allies who act as a senior body on nuclear matters in the alliance. And remember, the US is the dominant power in NATO still. Last year, 66% of all NATO spending came from the United States. So for the avoidance of doubt and for the avoidance of the defence press, we are a client state.
The point about renting the ordnance for the F-35s, well, the Trident missiles are rented from the United States. As the late John Ainsley explained to me one time, and he put it so well, take Trident missile, serial number 12345, it's built in the USA, it's stored in the USA, a British sub goes to the USA, gets a load of missiles from a commons warehouse, and then they head off, put on warheads that are based on British American designs. Then after that, they take the missiles back after a bit period of time where they're unloaded, they get a new set of missiles, and the missiles go into reconditioning. So Trident missile serial number 12345 could be on a British ship 1 year, and it could be on one of the American nuclear subs, a Virginia-class submarine 2 or 3 years later. So the idea that Britain has an independent nuclear deterrent is absurd. I mean, it's not a deterrent and it's not independent. Mm-hmm. The F-35s are even more integrated because they're so-called tactical weapons. And it makes it more dangerous because if they are the one thing you can say about a tactical nuclear weapon is, and one can argue whether or not it's smaller or not, and they probably aren't, and they cause escalation, is they are under the control of officers much further down the command food chain. And the more steps you've got in a command food chain, the more likely the mistakes are likely to be made. And that's the point about, everybody thinks that every nuclear weapon is going to be checked off by either the President of the United States, the President of Russia, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of China, who happens to be the President as well, and the heads of states of the other nuclear states, the President of France. That's not the case. There are decision makers below that level, and the more you have, the more likely it is that a mistake will be made.
Over the past 10 years, there have been 2 trials of UK Trident missile tests. It was done off the US coast. They're quite expensive, which is why there's probably only been 2. And I'm sure the Russians and the Chinese and everyone else would have been watching. Both of them failed totally. One went in the wrong direction. It's just as well it wasn't an active warhead, because I think it went in the direction of Florida. And the other went up and plopped. And the British Defence Minister was actually there watching at the time. How embarrassing that must have been. Those are the only actual 2 tests over the past decade. So the idea with our clapped out submarines, which again, it's our submariners who are suffering from this longer spells at sea. The idea that this is providing us with security is a myth.
Yeah.
It is creating risk for us, but it's certainly not providing us with security. And that is why being part of the UK is a national security risk for Scotland.
Well said. There was another contribution at that conference. It's a very short clip I've got of Craig Beil, who I think makes another point relating to Labour's push for nuclear energy.
In an advanced democratic economy like the UK's, it's possible, if you want, to run a civilian nuclear power sector without nuclear weapons, if you wanted to. It's not possible to run a nuclear weapons sector without the civilian nuclear power. So whenever the UK politicians are talking about that nuclear power, they're using it as a cover for the nuclear weapons sector.
That is really important. And there's also another aspect that's emerging. They call them small modular reactors. Yeah. And they're talking about, even there was talk recently in the media about even, some being, or 1 or 2 being deployed in Scotland. To me, the small modular reactor is even more dangerous than the large nuclear power station. And, I've done stuff about Zaporizhzhia power station before, and we've talked about it. But a small modular reactor, one of the marketing lines for small modular reactors is, we can sell them to the developing world. They're cheaper, they're mobile. Well, consider the following scenario. We know that climate chaos is going to get worse in the developing world. It's already happening. 2, wars break out that are related to water shortage and other resource issues. So there is instability in various parts of the world already because of climate chaos. But supposedly a small modular reactor will help. So imagine if a small modular reactor is sold to a part of the world that's unstable, okay? So instead of having the Ukrainians on the one side and the Russians on the other, and a nuclear power plant that's 3 times the size of Hunterston or something like that in the middle of it, that's dangerous enough. But it's big. The 2 armies involved are professional. There are issues and there are dangers. Imagine a small SMR in a part of the world where the forces fighting each other in a civil war, they are, to use a euphemistic military term, made up of irregular forces, whatever that means, are not under control, with an SMR there. And by the way, one of the ways one of the marketing things said about an SMR, yes, you could put it on a ship, you could take it to some a large river entrance, and you could anchor it there. So it's even worse because it's sitting in a ship, sitting in a zone where you've got a civil war, and it gets sunk. I mean, the lobbying will have to be very skillful and very expensive to get an export license to send one of these things to some part of the world that's unstable.
And did you see poor Anna Sarwar again just yesterday? He was saying, oh, but the Scottish Government hadn't focused on growth. And he was asked, well, what would create more growth in Scotland? And the only thing the poor soul could come up with, well, we would get new nuclear power stations and all the jobs that came from this. All I could think was, Anas, you were a decent dentist, and just because your big brother got into trouble and could no longer be the political person contesting elections in Scotland, they had to drag you out and put you in the role of leader of the Labour Party in Scotland. The idea that that is the positive vision for economic growth, I think Richard answered that very, very well.
Yeah, exactly.
In those 4 decades, I've campaigned and worked for peace and disarmament, for defence diversification, for arms conversion, for welfare not warfare, for socially useful work, for the removal of US bases, for a peace dividend, for dignity in old age and justice for all ages. So I have to say to you that what we are witnessing today is a shift in public policy led by a Labour government which is counter to everything I have spent the last 40 years of my life arguing against, working against and acting against. And what we are witnessing is not disarmament but rearmament, escalating militarisation, and openly, not in the name of peace, but openly in the name of war. A Labour government with an industrial policy which appears to be built on the free port, the weapons manufacture, the arms trade and the nuclear menace. These are the most inefficient, inhumane, uneconomic and anti-socialist forms of public and private spending that exist.
So do we have a sort of response to Lammy then, who started off this discussion, which has gone a very, very long route since then?
I remember when I became a senior union official, I decided I would buy myself a very expensive suit, a very expensive shirt with cufflinks, and a very expensive tie, and a very expensive pair of shoes. And I did find that because I was wearing this kit, people did treat me with more respect. You know, I mean, I honestly think that if men dressed in a particular way say something, people take them seriously, not because of what they're saying, but because the environment they're in. It's an absurdity. I mean, it really is an absurdity. I mean, apart from laughing about it.
I can't think of anything very profound to say, really. I'm stuck on the level of, oh, I won't ball your head.
I think the politically useful thing to say is that there we have leading Labour politicians saying that the ordinary people of Scotland are a threat to the national security of England.
And my takeaway would be he should get that Scottish 5% to have a word with the other 95%, because it's pure mince.
It is pure mince, that's true.
Yeah, it's just fun.
Thank you so much. As always, when we have you guys on, we have a fascinating conversation that takes us into areas we didn't think we were necessarily going to even get into. So a pleasure as always. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for coming.
Thanks for listening, everybody. I hope you enjoyed that. If you want to make sure you're following us and subscribe to us, then you get notified every time we put something new out, so you don't miss anything. That would be great. Also, you can click the little bell if you're watching on YouTube.
And sign up for our mailing list. You can do that from the website, and we always send one out at the beginning of each month to tell you what's happening. Last but not least, you can buy us a coffee on coffee.com.